Tonight, sandbagging, panic buying and cancelled events. Residents in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland get ready for Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Hello, I'm Nakari Thorpe. This is ABC News. Donald Trump pauses all US military aid to Ukraine after his fiery clash with Volodymyr Zelensky. A major police investigation underway into an online threat to a mosque in Sydney's southwest. And billions of dollars in extra funding for public schools after a Commonwealth and New South Wales government deal. 40 flood rescue teams have been put on standby in New South Wales as the state prepares for its first cyclone in decades. Cyclone Alfred is still 2 days away from making landfall near the Queensland border, but intense rain could start lashing the state's north as early as tomorrow.
As Cyclone Alfred gets closer, communities are digging deeper.
If you do need to do stuff, do it now, do it early.
Act early, be prepared.
For some, being prepared has meant panic buying, with shelves emptying out from Ballina to Lismore.
I've been downtown, there's nothing. I had to come up here.
And it's not just groceries running out.
I heard there were some sandbags, so I shot down to grab a few and nothing here.
Some businesses want to clear their shelves before the storm hits.
We're just doing a run out on all of our beer at the moment, all of our heavy stock.
They're packing up precious merchandise to guard against a repeat of the 2022 floods. The owners of this cafe have even cleared out the whole store, everything except the kitchen sink.
Our shop setup is all mobile, so on wheels. The 3-hour pack down and possible 3-hour, setup is hopefully for nothing, and we end up back here on Monday morning.
Livestock are also being moved to higher ground. Cyclone Alfred is due to make landfall between Thursday and Friday, bringing strong winds followed by moderate to major flooding.
The area of impact is exactly where it exactly will be is very hard to predict.
What we will do in the coming day is to ensure that we've got pre-positioned SES infrastructure and personnel.
Authorities are also urging residents to stay up to date with the Hazards Near Me app, which carries the latest flood and wind warnings.
We're seeing deteriorating weather conditions. It's happening quite rapidly.
Fingers crossed, it's all in God's hands, but I don't know. I'm very worried, to be honest.
Some are preparing to ride out the storm in their own way.
Sit in and do some meditation as the elements show us what they're capable of.
An almighty show that will put the state to the test. Emma Rennie, ABC News.
Well, more than 30 sandbag locations have been set up across New South Wales in preparation for Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Victoria Pingilli is at one of the sites in Lismore this evening. Victoria, how are residents there feeling?
Look, there's no doubt that people are feeling very, very anxious. Local residents have been picking up sandbags from this golf club all day, and more are expected to arrive throughout the evening, which just gives you a sense of how seriously people are taking this weather event. Authorities are also on standby too. Water rescue crews have been sent up to Lismore, and an extra 50,000 sandbags are expected to arrive in coming days. Just today alone, SES crews moved 100 tonnes worth of sand. Look, local residents here are still really feeling the impacts of the 2022 floods. In fact, the town never really recovered from it. And while the eye of the storm is not expected to pass through Lismore, people are aware of the risk and the damage that the aftermath of a tropical cyclone can bring, and they're not taking any chances. Nakari?
OK, Victoria Pingilli in Lismore, thank you. With Tropical Cyclone Alfred set to also lash southeast Queensland, the window to prepare is rapidly narrowing. Authorities are warning conditions there will become dangerous from tomorrow.
A vast swathe of coast from Queensland to New South Wales is at risk as Cyclone Alfred looms.
Nervous.
Sarah Mill manages a holiday park on the water north of Brisbane.
They're just hunkering down in their caravan and hoping for the best.
There's concern the Gold Coast may bear the brunt of the fury.
Every scenario that has been modelled indicates not a good outcome for our city.
It's a really rare event for southeast Queensland, but it is serious and it is happening, and we want Queenslanders to be prepared.
Brisbane's city cats have been moored or hoisted onto dry land. Many residents spent the day stocking up. Generators are in high demand.
I hope I'm overreacting.
I've got me new whippersnapper here and I'm going to clean up the yard, make sure there's no loose debris.
Shelves are being stripped bare, but authorities insist they will be restocked.
It's quite overwhelming in there. There's no loo paper, barely any actual essentials that you really need.
Sandbag stations are being swarmed.
Yeah, we were in a vehicle line for about 2 hours before we even got a sandbag.
You've got to protect your home, you know, whatever you can do.
On islands just off the coast, authorities are door-knocking vulnerable people. Councils across the region are assessing the risk of storm surges for homes in danger of being inundated by seawater.
If you decide to leave, you need to leave before the event starts impacting you.
Emma Pollard, ABC News, Redcliffe.
Well, the cyclone has forced the NRL to move its Friday fixture between the Dolphins and Rabbitohs from Brisbane to Parramatta following the postponement of the AFL's season opener. The sellout AFL match between the Brisbane Lions and Geelong Cats was meant to be played at the Gabba on Thursday night, but has been suspended due to Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Saturday's game between Gold Coast and Essendon will also be rescheduled. It leaves Sydney's SCG clash with Hawthorn as the new season opener. Well, for more details on what to expect, let's check in with our meteorologist, Tom Saunders. Tom, New South Wales lies on the most dangerous side of Alfred.
Yes, Nakari, we lie on the forward right quadrant of the storm, and that is where the weather is often the most severe. Now, that's because winds blow clockwise around a tropical cyclone in the southern hemisphere, which means the winds are moving in the same direction as the storm on that southern side, and that compounds the speeds experienced on the ground. Now, gales are indicated by the red arrows, but nearer to the eye, wind gusts could hit 150 kilometres per hour, strong enough to cause property damage and topple trees. Winds to the south are also onshore and therefore produce more rainfall. So although landfall is likely in Queensland, it's possible the heaviest rain will spread down the New South Wales coast. An average of 200 to 500 millimetres north from Taree, enough for both dangerous flash flooding and major river flooding, including all catchments from the Tweed River down to the Hastings. And finally, damaging surf with abnormally high tides and powerful waves exceeding 6 metres, producing both an inundation of the coast and significant beach erosion north of Smoky Cape. And I'll have more details on the impacts for the remainder of the state at the end of the bulletin.
The US has suspended all weapons supplies to Ukraine following the row between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader angered the US president again today after saying the end to the war was still a long way off.
The war of words are ratcheting up.
He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Trump angry that Ukraine's president predicted peace with Russia was a long way off, was then pressed on whether he'd cut off support for the country.
Who decided if you're going to suspend military aid to Ukraine? Have you made that decision?
Well, I haven't even talked about that right now. I mean, right now, we'll see what happens. A lot of things are happening right now as we speak. I mean, literally, as we speak, I could give you an answer and go back to my office, the beautiful Oval Office. I could go back into the Oval Office and find out that the answer is obsolete.
A few hours later, White House officials confirmed all aid would be paused and reviewed, leaving Ukraine cut off from the world's most powerful military. Last week, Donald Trump evicted Volodymyr Zelensky from the White House after their public blow-up. He accused the Ukrainian leader of acting like a tough guy because of US backing. This suspension of aid is clearly meant to weaken Zelensky's position and force him back to the negotiating table. The latest move from Washington also stepping up the pressure on Europe.
Tomorrow, I will inform the member states through a letter about the Rearm Europe plan, We need a massive surge in defence without any question. We want lasting peace, but lasting peace can only be built on strength.
In Ukraine, Russian attacks continue. Overnight, a drone hitting the town of Kharkiv. Any talk of a ceasefire seems a distant dream to people here.
I do not believe in it. Because look, everything was torn down. What talks? Who even believes in that?
Ukraine now facing an even more difficult fight for survival. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Washington.
Anthony Albanese has raised the prospect of sending Australian peacekeepers to Ukraine just hours after his government appeared to rule out the idea. The Prime Minister says all requests for assistance will be considered, but the opposition insists Europe is best placed to provide troops. His defence correspondent Andrew Green.
For more than 2 years, Australian troops have trained recruits for the frontline fight against Russia. But could they also join the Ukrainians at home to help keep the peace?
There's discussion at the moment about potential peacekeeping, and from my government's perspective, we're open to consideration of any proposals going forward.
The British Prime Minister has led the charge for an international coalition on the ground once a deal is struck with Vladimir Putin to end the war. On Monday, the Albanese government seemed reluctant to sign up.
Would we put troops or peacekeepers on the ground?
Again, we're not envisaging that sort of commitment, but we stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine.
Now it's a live option.
Australia has historically played an important role in areas including in Africa, in Cyprus, in a range of peacekeeping areas.
In terms of whether we should have boots on the ground in Ukraine, I don't support that. I think the Europeans have that task.
And so the UN convoy pulled out.
Australia last deployed boots on the ground in Europe for a United Nations mission in Yugoslavia over 3 decades ago. Ukraine says it would welcome the return of Australian peacekeepers to the continent. The Prime Minister will soon call an election, possibly as early as this weekend. And already there are signs defence will feature heavily in this year's campaign. After facing accusations of being weak on national security for his handling of visiting Chinese warships, Anthony Albanese signalled he's prepared to fight on territory that's usually considered a coalition strength. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Police have launched a major investigation tonight into an online threat targeting a newly opened mosque in Sydney's southwest. Nabil Anashar is at the mosque. Nabil, what more do we know about this threat?
Well, Nakari, someone has commented on Masjid al-Bayt al-Islami's Instagram page saying they would Christchurch 2.0 the mosque. Now, this comment has transformed the jubilant and spiritual atmosphere enjoyed by the community here over the last 4 days since the grand opening of this brand new mosque, coinciding with the first few days of the holy month of Ramadan. It's transformed that atmosphere into one of fear and serious concern for their safety. At this stage, police have launched a major investigation where they believe the source of the threat is interstate. Police also say that there is no ongoing threat to the community. The Christchurch 2.0 comment is a reference to the 2019 Christchurch massacre in New Zealand, where a gunman killed 51 Muslims and injured 89 more during Friday prayer at Al Noor Mosque. Premier Chris Minns says the government and the police are taking the threat very seriously, and also added that racist threats and Islamophobia will not be tolerated and will be met by the full force of the law. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has also weighed in, describing the threats as abhorrent.
OK, Nabil Anashar, thank you so much. Hamas has accused Israel of taking the Gaza peace process back to square one as the Netanyahu government threatens consequences if remaining hostages aren't released. The first phase of the ceasefire ended over the weekend with no agreement on what will happen next. It comes as Arab leaders meet in Cairo to discuss Gaza's future.
A crying shame. Mourners gather at the last of the funerals for the 8 Israeli hostages returned by Hamas in body bags. Itzhak El-Garat's family blaming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for failing to secure his release.
The enemy who caused your death was not the one who abducted you, but the one that abandoned you.
Anger spilling over into the parliament too, as families of people killed by Hamas on October 7 were initially stopped from observing a discussion about security failures on that day. The Prime Minister heckled as he issued this warning to the militant group.
I say to Hamas, if you don't release our hostages, there will be consequences you can't imagine.
Hamas is accusing Israel of trying to derail the ceasefire by asking to extend the first phase.
Israel is pushing to return things to square one and overturn the agreement.
In Gaza, there's growing anxiety the ceasefire could collapse altogether, as another 2 Palestinian men were killed by Israeli fire in Rafah. The IDF said they were violating security restrictions and posing a threat. North in Jabalia, 45-year-old Ayoub fears for his family as Israel continues to block all supplies, including food and fuel.
If they do not let aid in, famine will return as before, or even worse.
This Ramadan, the family is breaking their fast, grateful for the moment to have something to feed their children. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Pope Francis is continuing to rest and slept all night after suffering a setback in his pneumonia treatment earlier in the day, with 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure. The Vatican had reported it was caused by a significant accumulation of mucus and bronchial spasms. The pontiff required the use of non-invasive medical ventilation during his treatment. The 88-year-old has been in a Rome hospital for more than 2 weeks. Well, coming up on 7:30, footy's back, but not always on free-to-air TV.
I think for a majority of Australians, that first game when they turn on Saturday night, they're going to be questioning, actually, has the footy started?
A lot of people do not have Foxtel nor KO. They rely heavily on free-to-air television.
If you want to use it or see or watch, you've got to pay.
Are we losing some of our tradition?
It's a 4-on-1 inside 50.
The federal government today came a step closer to resolving the school funding wars with the states and territories. New South Wales schools will get a boost of nearly $5 billion over the next decade after the Minns government signed the government's funding deal. 25% of nationwide school funding will now come from Canberra.
The deal is done and the ink is dry.
This is the largest ever federal injection of funds into New South Wales schools ever by any government.
After fighting for years over who would pay and how much, the federal government and New South Wales came to an agreement.
For more than a decade, reasonable people around the country have been asking people like us, why is it that public schools aren't fairly funded? Today that finally ends.
The extra money starts next year.
This is a game changer for New South Wales.
It comes with strings. New South Wales made a commitment to improve teaching practices, expand Year 1 phonics and numeracy checks, and use the money to help kids who fall behind.
100%. So we can identify early in a child's learning career where something's gone wrong and where we need to correct it.
The funding deal comes at a time when school systems are under significant pressure. Parents have been leaving public schools in droves for better funded private schools, and it's hoped the funding deal will level the playing field.
We want parents to have a real choice. We want parents to know that the public school down the road's got all the resources.
The Teachers Union hopes this will tempt families back.
We can employ additional permanent staffing, reduce class sizes, get the additional resources into our schools to the benefit of our students.
The opposition has pledged to match the increase and called for the agreements to be made public. Shadow Education Minister Sarah Henderson told the ABC Labor continues to hide the terms of its funding deals with the states. Queensland is yet to give the funding deal a thumbs up. Connor Duffy, ABC News.
A person is in a critical condition and another is in hospital after they were injured in an explosion at a home in Sydney's south. Emergency services were called to Hurstville just before 9 o'clock this morning. Fire and rescue say the 2 people caught the full impact of the explosion, with a man suffering serious and significant burns to most of his body. Forensic investigators are still trying to determine the cause. The Premier says private contractors will no longer be used to track the ankle bracelets of alleged criminals. The Department of Corrective Services currently monitors people accused of serious domestic violence offences, as well as those on parole. But private firms are being used to track about 120 others. Earlier this year, one company collapsed, catching the government off guard. And last week, a man cut off his ankle bracelet shortly after being released on bail.
So we're ruling a line in the sand. Obviously, we need to work out transition processes for particular individuals that might have the ankle monitoring on at the moment, but we've had enough and the evidence is in.
Australian veterans suffering from PTSD and depression will soon have access to a new and unconventional form of treatment. The government is preparing to fund therapies that make use of MDMA and psilocybin, the compound found in magic mushrooms. While authorities develop a framework, ex-service members have been sharing their experiences.
Former Commando Daniel Vincent isn't letting a spinal injury stop him from being a triathlete.
Physical activity is a huge part of my life, and I think it's a huge part of why I can cope mentally as well.
Like many veterans, he also left the military with psychological injuries.
I saw death at its finest. Like, I worked in the ERs in Iraq.
When antidepressants didn't work for him, he started microdosing on psilocybin, with interesting results.
I don't get depressed like I used to. I haven't had suicidal thoughts in, Jesus Christ, in a very long time.
Microdosing psychedelics was, and still is, illegal. But as of 2023, authorised psychiatrists can administer the drugs for the treatment of certain medical health conditions. Now the Department of Veterans Affairs is preparing to fund the use of MDMA and psilocybin-assisted therapies for vets with PTSD and treatment-resistant depression.
We're absolutely desperate for the support. The need is incredible. A lot of us, and even myself, have been isolated for years in these battles.
The DVA is developing a framework to assess requests. It hopes by combining the treatment with therapy sessions, it will allow patients to deal with memories that are otherwise too traumatic to talk about.
I got a sense, the very first few patients I treated, that I was able to do kind of a year's worth of therapy in that dosing day.
But others warn the new treatments might not be for everyone.
The research that's coming out for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies is promising, but it's certainly nowhere near as robust as the evidence we have for these other treatments.
If we control it too much, and then people are going to go do it behind back sheds. But control it enough that it's not about making money, it's about getting people better.
Daniel is just glad other veterans have a legal route to get the help they need. Lucas Forbes, ABC News.
The gender pay gap in Australian companies is getting narrower, but not by much. Just 1 in 5 businesses have eliminated it. It's the second time this data has been published, allowing workers to see which firms are making progress and which are going backwards.
For working men and women, different outcomes.
The national gender pay gap is 21.8%, which means that on average, for every dollar that a man earns, women earn 78 cents.
New data exposes the gap at every business with more than 100 staff.
56% of companies improved their gender pay gap in the last 12 months.
Qantas is celebrating International Women's Day by having more than 50 flights operated entirely by women. But for every dollar a man at Qantas makes, a woman, on average, earns just 64 cents. And at Jetstar, it's 54 cents.
I think the publication of the data is absolutely essential. It does accelerate change.
Brittany Carroll's story at pharmaceutical giant GSK shows how the gap can be narrowed.
It was about 6 weeks away from me going on parental leave and my dream role became available. My initial thoughts were, I don't even think I can apply.
But she won the more senior, better paying job, and it was held for her until she came back. The company's human resources boss says narrowing the gap takes time.
So this data is a really positive step to be more transparent and to be able to have a better conversation with employees.
Since our interview, the global company has dropped diversity targets to avoid breaking the law in the United States, where President Trump has slammed programs that support the inclusion of marginalised groups. Experts say companies here must comply with Australian law. Daniel Ziffer, ABC News.
Well, to finance now, and the US share market suffered its biggest fall of the year last night after President Trump said the tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico would be going ahead. That led to another fall on the local markets. Here's Alan Kohler.
America's 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico came into effect at 4 p.m. our time. There is a growing suspicion that those and other Trump tariffs might cause a recession in the United States, so it was interesting that shares in New York last night fell more than in Mexico City or Toronto. In fact, of the three markets this year, the US has performed worst, flat versus a 1% gain in Canada and 5% in Mexico. But let's face it, investors are guessing. They're in uncharted waters, hoping not to bump into something. The Australian market fell today as well, of course, down 0.7%, but the biggest falls were energy stocks like Santos and Woodside, because the oil price fell after OPEC said it's going ahead with a planned production increase in April. It was going to be put off because of all the uncertainty at the moment, but apparently Mr. Trump pressured them to get petrol prices down. And as if he didn't have enough to do, Mr. Trump also announced last night that he's going to create a US strategic cryptocurrency reserve. Not just Bitcoin, but also XRP, Solana and Cardano. Now, this chart of the Solana price is typical of what happened to all of them last night. A sharp rise followed by, wait a minute, what does it mean? No one knows. Sell. And the US dollar went up because of the tariffs, and the Aussie fell a bit as a result. Finally, a very interesting chart from Westpac showing the premium or discount of the cost of building new houses and units versus the price of existing ones, on average, across Australia. New units cost 10% more to build than existing ones, and new houses cost 10% less to build than existing ones. How about that? And that's finance.
Well, let's take a look at the weather now. And Tom, Cyclone Alfred will impact most of the state.
Nakari, eventually rain will spread right down to the Victorian border, although flooding will mostly be contained to the north coast. Cyclone Alfred behaved as expected today, taking the predicted sharp turn towards the coast. Now, what's clearly visible on the satellite is the thickest cloud is to the south of the eye, a feature which could lead to the heaviest rain falling in New South Wales and not Queensland. Rain on the north coast will peak through Thursday and Friday before rain spreads south across much of the inland this weekend. Current modelling shows an average fall of nearly 50 millimetres for many central and southern districts. However, it's still unclear how much rain will fall in Sydney, while totals in the hundreds of millimetres are a certainty on the north coast. Fresh southeasterly winds off the Tasman brought a cloudy and showery day to Sydney. A low of 20 and a high of 27 were both 2 degrees above the average. The statewide minimums were up to 6 above normal in the northwest, Tibooburra 23, while today's highs were up to 8 above in the west. Wilcannia and Burke hit 40 degrees. On the satellite then, well, cloud from Alfred is bringing some showers already to our east. Now, the Barrington Tops has already received more than 100 millimetres since 9 a.m. yesterday. On the chart tomorrow, rain will increase further along the north coast as Alfred approaches from the east. Around the country, rain and wind increasing in Brisbane. Warm and sunny, though, for Perth, Melbourne and Adelaide. Now, for the northeast tomorrow, windy with rain and possible thunderstorms for the mid-north coast and the northern rivers. There's a high chance of showers for the Hunter and the Ranges. For the southeast, a medium chance of showers for the Illawarra and a mostly dry day elsewhere. Further inland, it's looking dry west of the Divide. Still hot, maximums heading for the mid-30s in most towns. Now, on the waters, we'll have gales for the north coast with seas and swells exceeding 4 metres off the mid-north coast and the northern rivers. Winds not quite so strong further south. For Sydney, partly cloudy with a high chance of showers. They're more likely in the morning. Southeasterly winds up to 25 kilometres per hour. Temperature range of 20 to 27 for the city, tops of 25 on the coast and highs up to 28 degrees across the west. Now, the sun will rise at 6:44 and set just before 7:30 p.m. And ahead for Sydney, well, there's not much change in the weather from day to day due to the ongoing southeasterly winds. We'll have a shower or two on Thursday, Friday and Saturday, highs of between 26 to 27 degrees. Some heavier showers are possible in Sydney on Sunday, but that depends on the movement of Cyclone Alfred after it hits the coast. But regardless, it looks like some showers will continue into the early part of next week. Nakari.
Thanks, Tom. Well, that's all from ABC News for now. For more tonight, you can find the latest both on our website and on the ABC News app. Sarah Ferguson is here now with 7:30.